everyone, and welcome to the special feature episode of Room for Doubt. Today we have an exciting topic, and we have an equally exciting panel before us. Later on in the session, it will be opened up so that you can direct your questions directly to the persons on the panel in front of you. Before we start, each speaker will introduce themselves. Just your name is all right.
Hi, Kumej.
Hi, Nyasha Msandi.
Nkosana Moyo.
Hi, I'm Tishana Chitsinge.
We're truly excited to have you and grateful that you're here. So the question before us is the born-free generation complacent towards driving change in Zimbabwe? We're not at war. We were born into a generation that wasn't at war, so we didn't fight for independence. Would it truly be fair to say that we have been complacent, even though we are coming out? What are we coming out from? As was mentioned, I don't know if you resonate with that, Tish.
So, in as much as you might want to say born-frees, it's not just born-frees. It's every generation. And even if you look at the analogy of the liberation struggle that's been given, what percentage of that generation actually took part in the struggle? You'll find it's a very small percentage that was actively involved. So complacency is something we've been born into, unfortunately. It's something that we grow up with, and it's something that you're expected to be a part of. That unless somebody else is driving an agenda, you can't take part.
If you look at young people, and I don't think it's just in Zimbabwe, I think you find it in other contexts as well. What tends to happen is we live in a bit of a catch-22 situation. So for instance, if you were to look for a job, what are the things you're likely to see on the application? You must have experience, and that experience must have been about 5 to 10 years, right? You're coming out of university. Where exactly does that experience come from? So if we look even in the organizations we work in, I work a lot in the development sector. What you see is at the helm of a lot of these institutions are people who have been there a long time, and what we value from them is this experience. And because these people have been sitting in these positions for a very long time, we start to say the young people have nothing to offer. So when a young person comes into that kind of an organization, it's very hard for them to break the barriers and to rise as quickly. So I hear my parents talking about how by the time they were 35, they were, past middle management. It's not really the same for a lot of our peers. The reason being is people have not been able to move out of the workspace or the political space, wherever, for various reasons. So when you say young people have been complacent, I think it's actually a very deep issue, very nuanced. There are very many issues that come to bear. So, yes, young people in some ways need to fight harder for the space they want to dominate. But in other ways, they're fighting a system that's, hedged. We talk about, the political space. But really, if you look at even companies, people refuse to leave them. Why is that? It's because there is an inability by those who are older or have the experience to let go. And when a young person comes in, it's like, oh, you're the IT guy, right? You're the guy who's going to make us good at Twitter and the guy who's good at Facebook. But you're not the guy who's going to build the strategic direction of the organization. You're not the guy who people are looking to have ideas. So young people really have to fight hard for that space. And then added to that, in a Zimbabwean context, and I'll speak for myself as a woman, if you're a young woman, then it's like, well, what do you really have to offer? When is it you're going to go off and get married? So there's all these things that are happening that stifle young people's ability to really capture the space and to move forward.
Firstly, what leads to complacency? And what is complacency? I suppose complacency is not being proactive in order to achieve a particular outcome. And the way the question is being framed, are born free is complacent. So I take that being born free is significant in this debate. It's got to be significant, yeah? You've made it a point of reference. I think earlier on, interestingly, I was discussing with this gentleman, what's your name again? Ishainis, about art. And I asked him whether art is a reflection of what people have experienced or whether it's a reflection of what they aspire to. And I think we agreed that it's more a reflection of what people have lived, the lived life, yeah? They're expressing how they feel at a particular point in time because of where they've come from. I think human behavior generally, not just artists, is driven by what you've experienced, what you may aspire to, but that depends on your perception of what is possible. Okay? Now, born free is what have you experienced? Our history is actually unknown to most of you. And it is not your fault that you don't know that history. It is our fault. The older generation is not invested in making younger people, the born frees, really appreciative of where this country came from. What happened? Why did we go through what we did? So if we've not invested in making you understand where we came from, it would suggest to me that cannot be an input into your behavior, because we've deprived you of that particular exposure of where we came from, right? Now, what is left is what you yourselves have experienced and what you may aspire to through your global exposure, because a lot of you have traveled through social media. You're also aware of what goes on and what's possible elsewhere. The question I think is posed suggests a linkage between where this country has come from and what you should be doing yourselves proactively to influence where we go. Yeah? So I think we need to be quite careful. I think you could behave differently, but I would not attribute your behaviors toward, say it's because of complacency. I would say if that were to be true, then we'd have to see that the older generations have helped you to understand the history that has led to where we are. But having said that, is there sufficient around you for you to behave differently? I would like to think yes. The answer is yes. Because I think where this country is at the moment is not satisfactory for most people. And therefore, that alone as a stimulus should be, in my opinion, provoking a different behavior from the born frees. And I don't think that is happening.
Challenges I face here, we have got access to land, and a South African has access to work in Barclays and drive a C-class in his first 3 years, but he doesn't have access to land. We were fighting very different wars. So I think when we then look at that war, and I think based on what everyone said, I think we're very apologetic. I think we're not unapologetic about what we want. I think we have to go for what we want. It's not going to be given to us. There's no way. So it's an establishment. So the CEO, let's say, of Barclays or Deloitte or whichever institution we work for, has a family to feed. And he's got extended family to feed. There's no way he's just going to come, I'm going to get in there and he's going to say, Mr. Chifamba, you look very smart. Here it is, take it. And then I think our parents inherited a system where what worked, so there were services and industries in this country that worked prior to 1980. I think as a country we haven't quite realized that economically, that what worked for maybe an affluent bunch or a much smaller nation is not necessarily the fundamentals that will work going forward. And in 20 years there'll probably be another economic shift. But what I think as a young generation we need to understand is that if we are not going to be given space in the organizations that we're in politics, and our families, why are we not creating space outside of that? Disruptive innovation. So Facebook, Twitter, they've disrupted the way we communicate. And I think as a young generation, we now need to disrupt the economy, the landscape, the political landscape to suit us.
If the people sitting in this room focus on what happens at the individual and family level, firstly, it's unsustainable because the total system is bigger than your little world. And the total system is going to swallow over time. Even if you create sanity around yourself, it's going to get swallowed up. It will be contaminated, it will become toxic. So you cannot create something sustainable at that level, okay? So maybe actually part of this, what we perceive as complacency, is because all of you are still fighting for the personal space and you think you can sustain that. As opposed to saying, let's combine our efforts and create an environment within which the individual can then thrive. You understand? And I think it could actually manifest itself as complacency because you're not concerning yourself with societal issues. You are saying, if I can build a wall around my house and sink a ball and buy a generator, I'm fine. Who cares about what happens whether people are stoned in Bari or not? Yeah.
Systems exist within a larger system, and right now the problems we see in Zimbabwe cascade from our greater political system. We cannot insulate ourselves from it, right? Because politics is our everyday life, whether it's going to the shops to buy bread, going to our jobs, buying our cars. Our political environment either inhibits that or enables it. So I think the more we try and run away from when we ask the question of complacency, where the youth have the opportunity to generate the most change is at a political level. And that starts with their participation. So I think our complacency comes to the fore when we start to look at how we engage with our political landscape. So just getting prepared for this, I was trying to really find stats on youth participation that were not really about politics. But unfortunately, we're in voter registration season. My mind is obsessed with it. So I'm going to go there, and please forgive me. But if we look at the last elections, right now what we have is 47% of the voting population is what we call youth. That's between the ages of 18 to 35, right? That is our voting population. In the last election in 2013...
Can we just dwell on this? Please stop right now. 47%.
Yes,
47.7.
If we're going to be really about the numbers, right? So that is, almost half, right? And if we look at the last election, less than 9% of that figure participated. That means 2 million young people did not raise their voice in any direction in the political landscape. If we look at the numbers that won the presidency, one was about 2 million votes, and the second was about 1.3 or something. Those 2 million people who sat at home could have made a phenomenal difference.
Not cool. Would.
So, Dr. Moya, I'm guessing your point is that perhaps this generation should register to vote.
Wow, that would be a great start. I mean, it would be great. I'll tell you something, my own experience. Let's go into own experiences. So I'm running with Fadzai Mahere's Leader Change campaign. We're doing a lot to get youth registered. The question we get all the time from young people, which I find absolutely mind-blowing, is why bother to register? And it really worries me because it's like, okay, my first question is always, are you employed? Most of them, it's no. So why not? Well, I mean, if you're not doing anything else with your time, why not just take that time to go? But at the same time, a lot of us in this room before we started were talking about the prospect of leaving. For whom to fix what we have now? We want to go and enrich other places. And when we start to talk at that individual level, it makes sense because you're looking at yourself and saying, yes, I will benefit. But when we're looking at Zimbabwe and saying, are we doing enough? Surely our work starts here. So the least you could do is register to vote. Then the next question becomes to vote for whom? Well, that's where we should now be having an interesting debate and getting ourselves involved. You cannot expect to have a voice where you don't participate.
Those last two contributions are valid points, but what they speak to is an inherent inability to generate critical mass for anything around them. And that's something we're going to have to address, not just because it affects how we then engage in the political or economic sphere, but how we relate to each other. Because it's all very well to lump people together and say born-free generation, but do all of those people in that demographic identify as one unit with the same interests, with the same ambitions? The truth is, honestly, right now we don't. And that's where we need to start having that conversation as to why do we not feel the same way when everybody else looking at us is the same demographic. You then find your issues of those who stayed, those who left. If you were not here in 2008, there's always that, no, you did not fight the war. Ask us who ate vulgar wheat. You don't know anything. You then have you came back, you got a job. You have a job, I don't have a job. All of those various fragmentations around the young people need to be addressed. And we need to start recognizing that there is no one unique experience. In as much as we need to build critical mass, our critical mass is going to be celebrating how all of our different experiences can contribute to the kind of Zimbabwe we want to see. Because right now, even when you're looking at the political parties themselves, they have a very narrow agenda of what the youth is. For some, it's, yes, youth, we are the biggest voting bloc. Vote for us so that this happens. But what happens after we voted for you? Do we then stop being a bloc? And those conversations are always driven by people who aren't youths. If you look at that discourse around, no, youth, you have the power, youth, you have the future, it's never a young person saying it. Except very recently, with a few exceptions. Most of that is from Dr. Moyo's generation. That was like the youth, getting put in building block. Building block for who? To do what? So we need to be honest with ourselves as a generation, and then we can start dealing with all of those things that affect us from an individual perspective. Where you then find someone saying, I really don't care about the system because whatever happens doesn't change my life. But it doesn't change your life right now. But should your circumstance change, will it not affect your life? It will.
What have you seen that other people, other countries are doing that we're not doing? How can we empower ourselves? Yes, we can speak up. We probably do that. We talk about we're on social media. Is that enough? What else can we do?
But do you allow me to just pick up on a couple of points which arose, which I think are very important. The first one is this issue of a few people here said we are considering leaving, which is a valid issue. All I would ask you to do, you are all very smart young people. Just observe global trends. The world as a whole is becoming an unfriendly place. Don't kid yourselves that you're going to find somewhere is going to create an environment which is very welcoming for you. You need to try to really understand what happened with the Trump's election and Brexit and what that is about beyond the very sort of narrow things that are identified. There is, in financial terms, we'd call it a correction. Globalization is going through a correction. Yeah? We went too far one way, and the benefits of globalization were not equitably felt by different populations. And they are pushing back. And wherever you think you're going to have a safe haven, my suspicion is that you're going to find that it's actually not that welcoming. So it's much easier to create in your own home space an environment that's going to be much more facilitative for what you want to do. So that's the first observation. The second one is a very valid observation you make about the youth is a very broad term which is sometimes not justified if we don't drill into it to see what is in the youth. Employed, unemployed, from a gender perspective, urban and so rural and so on and so on. But again, you people sitting in this room are very fortunate. You are smart, you are leaders already. The way I think you get a group of people to move together is the ability of the leadership to try and distill the issues into a thread which can be commonly held. So it should be possible for you to define the challenges to young people in a way that can be bought into by all of the different strata of who falls into that category. The main issue being your future is at stake. All of you. There is nobody who is young who cannot identify with the fact that a future that works is going to work for them in their own way. It's the common denominator is, what are you doing about the future? I won't be there. So my interests are not included in how you might choose to define what the objectives and the timelines for those objectives. If you do them in a smart way, every young person will identify with it. So you can actually create a commonly held definition of the struggle and mobilize all young people to participate.
I actually have a follow-up question for that.
Yeah.
So all of us in this room had the opportunity to go out and they decided to stay here. They came back, they decided to work on the country. But the question isn't so much, should we get together and decide, and maybe that's the answer, should we get together and decide what's important for the future and move towards that, which is impossible because as was mentioned, we have different views. But we're looking out to perhaps other generations, including yours, and you might help us. Also with your international experience, what can we do to drive change? Because that's the question.
Let me try and simplify this. If I was your age, I would be asking myself, where do I want my country to be 20 years from now? And it's not an easy exercise, and that's why people then don't see it through. Where do I want, in as granular a way, to see my country in 20 years from now?
Sorry, and isn't that individual?
No. So it's both individual and collective. The countries you want to run away to, there are certain things that attract you in those countries. So it's actually easy to map those issues that are attractive in those countries into where you want Zimbabwe to be 20 years from now. Okay? As a collective. Yes, individual and collective. It's possible to do that. What that does for you in a very analytical and systematic way, if I know where I want to be, it's like a journey. I know where I want to be 20 years from now. I contrast that with where I am now. So I see what the differences are. All of a sudden, I can begin to map the nature of the journey to go from here to there. And included in that mapping is what partnerships do I want to create? Partnerships including what kind of people do I want to call my leaders who will be capable of taking me from here to that destination. All of a sudden, my numbers can now be mapped into a collective action. How do we achieve the identification of these partners to journey with as a collective using our numbers? Because our numbers will determine what the outcomes are. Back to the politics, I'm afraid.
Do you guys agree? And do we all think the same? Can we all map it out?
I think we need to establish. So I was fortunate. I've traveled quite a bit, and then so so there are three nationalities that have really stuck out to me: Italians, Nigerians, and Americans. You cannot say anything negative about any one of those people as a foreigner, but they can say what they want about themselves amongst themselves. You will not go to a Nigerian man and slam Nigeria, but he can slam Nigeria. As a country, I think we need someone to answer our national question. I don't think we as a country, from the top to the bottom, really know where we want to be, who we are. And I think when we answer that, and when we as a collective are united and say, no, I'm Zimbabwean, okay, we don't have mayonnaise $8, but I'm Zimbabwean. We will start being, not that we're fighting it, but it's our situation. It's personal. That's my family. I'm going to deal with it with my family. And then we say, no, I want mayonnaise to be $1. I want it to be 50 cents. We will start moving forward. I agree with them is that we need to look forward, identify where we want to be in 5 years, 10 years, and work backwards. Right now, I think as an entire country, we are just all moving in different directions, and we don't seem to have a common, there's no coherence, there's no strategy, there's no flow.
So I would say it begins with engaging, right? So all this mapping and bringing together, there's a sense of engaging, right? And I think let's give young people a break. There has been some engagement. There's been a change in how young people have been interacting with their bigger, societal landscape. I think there's been a bit of a shift. But we have to graduate from the conversations. We have to graduate from the debates. And now we have to systematically plan. When I say we, I don't mean a few people. I mean you have to make yourself available to this process of change. We cannot passively be part of a change process. You have to engage in it enough and make yourself available. So a lot of people are comfortable with waiting for someone else to set the tone. We're waiting for someone to say, this is the plan, and then we sign up to it. Unfortunately, we don't have enough young people who have experienced and moved and seen who are engaging in that process of planning. So what you end up with is where our arguments always come from is because we're not available to give our contributions. We end up being eternal critics because we're always coming at it from well, they didn't look at this. But like I said before, if you don't engage and put yourself in a position where you start to be part of those conversations, start to be part of that mapping, you'll always be left behind, and you'll find yourself constantly asking the question, how do young people get involved? Are young people complacent? So there's something about, you used the word passive earlier that I think is really, really key in how we are a lot right now as young people. We're very passive. We engage passively. We have to move that passivity into action. We have to find ways to engage, to insert ourselves and to be part of those conversations. So all our experiences need to come to bear. And it doesn't only start at the kind of national level. It's in all the things we engage ourselves to do, right? We have to become actors. We have to have agency. We have to want to push these agendas. So, we talk about how bad a city Harare is becoming. I don't know of an organization that set up some sort of a shadow group that envisions what we want the city to be, led by young people. What is stopping us from taking those decisions to do those things, right? The economy, when the time of bond notes came, I remember it was really interesting. There were all these debates about, wow, what are the solutions? We didn't really hear young people saying, these are the types of things we should be looking to do. What we were arguing about is, well, it could work, it could, maybe it won't. Those are the things, but we weren't sitting and saying, from what we know, how do we come out of the situation? And until we start to look forward with action, not only with our thoughts. Thoughts are wonderful, but they without expression, they cannot do anything. So it's about taking our thinking and taking where we are now, where we see there is a need and there's this place for us to be. How do we become active agents in that process?
Yes, as much as we know that the generations before us fought the war and so on and so forth, we have that period of history that we seem to have jumped between the 80s and now, where we've been present and alive as the youth or as the born frees, and we've been observing what's been happening. We have a very unfortunate situation in our country right now, but this is not the first time this has happened, right? We've seen what has happened in the past. We've learned what the personal risk and consequences are to acting in a particular way. So I would say we've learned to be passive. In some cases, because we've learned the cost of being active. In some cases, because we've learned that we don't have any power. So that's just one suggestion I have as to what the reason is behind this complacency or this passivity that we have.
Can I have a go at this? And I'm sorry, you're going to have to give me license to now really wade into the political space. So, I want to change one word. I think hear what you're saying, but instead of learned passivity, if you'd say to me strategic passivity, I would have said, hooray, I agree. Because there is no point putting yourself in the way of danger completely unnecessarily. You need to look at your environment around you, you need to understand it, and behave in a manner that shows that you understand the risks. So, that should not, though, result in passivity. It should result in a much more strategic risk management behavior. Yeah? What does that look like? So in this country, nobody can contest that we live in a very toxic political environment. Nobody. So you are seeing where somebody's t-shirt, you get stoned, your properties get destroyed and so on and so on. Why therefore would I be expected to expose myself in that way? For me, that is learning from experience to become more strategic, as opposed to learning from experience to become passive. Not the same thing. And voting does not expose you to any of these things. Don't wear a t-shirt, don't go to a rally. Just go and register and turn up and vote. That's management of risk, smart management of risk. Especially by your generation, people who are here, you ought to be helping the others who may not appreciate the same level of strategic thinking as you do. And I think this is where your challenge of how do you create the real, how do you translate those numbers into a reality of a block of young people? Because their understanding of strategic management won't be the same. That's what we ought to be sharing with them. Be clear about what the objective is. The objective is not to get beaten. It delivers nothing to you. The objective is to make a difference in the outcome of an election and manage your risks in a manner that is clearly focused on that objective, not anything else.
Are there any other questions from the floor? Or do you completely agree? Or
so just that kind of just the question about, learned passivity. It's quite interesting because I'm also a believer that no risk, no reward. That's reality, right? And yes, you must manage your risk, absolutely. But you've got to risk something. And I think a lot of the time we don't want to risk anything because we've created, we create these fences that make life comfortable for us as individuals or just our family. And then we ignore the larger context. And we have to risk something. And whether that risk is as simple as you registering to vote, whether that risk is as simple as you donating to a political campaign, whether you must risk something. And I think we use, sometimes as young people, we use the excuse that we've learned passivity. We've seen other people do it and now we're afraid. Yes, I believe that, but I think for a lot of us, it's an excuse to completely disengage. It doesn't give you license to not do anything. It doesn't give you license to not participate. Because, okay, if you don't participate, who's going to participate? Where will the change come from? So we take this fear and we say, okay, this fear is enough to justify us doing absolutely nothing at all. So it's like at work, sometimes you have to make a strong decision about something. If it goes wrong, it could be your job. But it doesn't mean that you don't, right? It doesn't mean that then it says to you, I'm not going to participate, I'm not going to do anything. So it's the same with our larger issues. So you must risk. And when other people, I'm going to say this out loud, when other people step up and you believe, you must support. What we don't do is we like on Facebook. If I could translate Facebook likes into money, I would be wealthy. I wouldn't be here. I'd be in a yacht somewhere, sipping wine. Because that's our level of engagement. We must support. So if someone stands, and I don't mean support by going to toy, but we must be supporters of things we believe in. We must add our voices. We must do more. So it's not an excuse to say there are risks. There are risks to getting in a car. That's why you wear a seatbelt. Yes? There are real risks. We strap on our seatbelt because we could die in that vehicle. But the thing is, the vehicle gets us from point A to B, and we need to be at point B. Right? The reward outweighs the risk. It is the same with our country. If we don't engage, if we don't act, and we say we've learned to be passive, the only person who's not getting to point B is you, along with everybody else who refused to get in the vehicle.
Yeah, so that's the strategic rather than passivity.
Sorry, can I take from this and then direct it back?
One question I have, I think, for everyone on the panel, Titch alluded to it earlier. The born-free generation is comprised of different segments. And I think one major issue is that of mistrust, right? The way I'm saying mistrust is someone who's grown up Kumusha, or someone who's grown up Kumaketo, or someone who's grown up in the Deltas, or your political affiliation, the infiltration of society's experience. People, there's a trust issue. So I'm curious to understand from the panel in the sense that if I stand up and I say I'm running or I'm doing something, the first question someone has, even before, is, where is he coming from? Where is she coming from? There's an inherent mistrust of someone you don't. So when you're a youth and you're saying, let's set a collective agenda, how do you think you can overcome some of these issues where people inherently behind closed doors are saying, this is a project or this is that. So I sense this mistrust, which has been infiltrated over the last 20, 30 years by a police state sort of environment. So I want to know, how do you guys think people from the different segments of our generation can overcome inherent trust issues?
All right, and that's a lovely question, and it ties into what I was going to say, building on what Mesha said, around risk and reward. But maybe another problem we should be looking at, in as much as we're looking at why people are passive, is, are we clear about the reward? Because maybe that's why someone doesn't feel like taking part, because they don't believe that they fit into whatever reward you're talking about. It's about you and your not of Samora lifestyle and your friends. You're the ones who are going to get the reward. So why should me and my South Samora life die for you? Which ties in directly with the mistrust that is debated, which is unfortunate that it has seeped so organically into everything we do. That the first thing we do is question. We don't even interrogate the issue, we question the person. I don't trust them. And already they switch off. So we're not going to debate the issue. We're not debating whether or not we should trust this person and not what they're saying. How do we fight that? I think it starts with having open and honest conversations, which is something we are notoriously lacking in as a generation, in whatever sphere, whether it's in the relationships, the work, in the things we support, we are inherently afraid of talking. I'll give you a very good example. How many of the people in your circle of friends do you actually talk to? Not, hi, it's a Friday, where are you going? Talk to. If you were to go through your entire phone book, how many people would you actually just talk to? And there's this entire network of people that you're keeping. That you're then going to come and say, I want to stand for you guys because. And you have no foundation beforehand from which you are relating to each other. So yes, I'm looking at you like, no, but guy, we only talk, when it's December, when we come back from wherever you would say. Now you're talking about running this thing from where I don't know you like that. So it's about getting to know each other and actually being honest with our experiences. That look, yes, I understand you're unemployed and it sucks. I was unemployed at some point, it sucks. But just because I'm working doesn't mean my life is perfect. There are days when I hate work. There are days when I want to call in and just, I'm ill, I can't come. There are days I don't sleep for 3 days straight. So yes, you saw me today on my day off and I'm looking fresh and you saw my fuel gauge and it's an F. This is like the one time in the year it's an F. This is not my life. So until at that point where we're honest with each other about ourselves as people, then we can start having those engagements. Because we're trying to jump a lot of processes that we need to achieve before we can start that.
Yes.
Sorry, I think this is a question that needs a bit more, because I think it's at the core of a lot of issues. I think the first thing I would like to point out, you need to accept the concept of contestation. So forget sort of ill intent and accept that different people come from different perspectives legitimately. If you accept that, you must then be prepared to engage with people who hold different views. I don't get fazed by the fact that I start off with people who say, no, Nkosana, I disagree. I come from a different point of view. Because it offers us a possibility to engage and then argue out their perception against mine. And with respect, okay? So that's point number one. Accept contestation of ideas. They are healthy. It's a valid way to achieve progress. Point number two. I think you need to have confidence in your value proposition. So if I meet you, I should not assume that you hold the same ideas that I do. So this is the contestation issue. But I must also be open enough to accept that you could tell me something I had not thought about. So I need to be open to saying, I'm going to share with you what I think and what I'm proposing. But it's not a closed chapter. I need also to be able to listen to what you've got to say. Yeah, respectfully. The last one. This issue of we've got what we have, an environment that is toxic, for me pushes the debate into the strategy section. That's our reality. You cannot wish it away. That's what you're dealing with. So, as smart people, what strategies do you come up with to deal with that reality? It's no good starting off by saying, I wish I was starting somewhere else. You are starting from where you are, okay? With this toxic environment. So what is your strategy? That is why we, again, I'm sorry to wade into this, we've come up with a strategy which says, I recognize these facts. How do I deal with the trust issue? I'm going to engage in a campaign which is based on family and friends. Family and friends. People where you already know and trust. And I ask those family and friends to do the same. And people don't seem to understand the mathematics. The mathematics actually will make you reach the population faster than a rally. Family and friends. People I can disagree with, but in a trusting relationship. That's where I start. So that's what you should be engaging with. Talk to your family and friends and engage robustly. And once you convince them, ask them to do exactly the same. Before long, you'll have covered everybody. And this argument, incidentally, also answers the question, how are you reaching the rural population? How are you reaching the diaspora? We come from an extended family situation. There is nobody who is in the diaspora who, if you start from there, you cannot reach somebody in the rural areas. It doesn't exist in Zimbabwe. Urban, diaspora, I reach the rural. Provided, however, we go back to something that is fundamental. This issue is a project for all Zimbabweans. So once we make people understand and take ownership, in other words, they are not doing you a favor. They are not doing me a favor. They are trying to change this country for themselves. Then we get the job done with very little hassle.
So I think I slightly disagree. Because, you know, I think what Tafuma asked was quite important is this idea of mistrust, right? And to overcome it, it actually comes from building trust. So what you have to do is, if you've given yourself to say, this is what we're going to do, you have to get your hands dirty. You've got to share your vision, and then you've got to start showing people that this vision can come true. And as people see actions, they're actually more likely to respond to them, right? So when we talk about being confident in our proposition, there's an underlying naivety if we say that our confidence is enough to bring people on board.
To engage.
To engage, but they come on board by us also compromising our position to bring on their thoughts.
That's why
right?
I said be open.
So the openness.
Yeah.
So when we say we talk, you know, Zimbabwean politics is one way, and people have been doing it for a long time, yeah? And you cannot expect to completely overhaul the system and it will work. So this idea of family and friends is great, where it's very utopian in its ideals, where I sit with my family and my friends. But as we know, family and friends is actually, you know, a hotbed for disagreement. You know, we know that that's where disagreement is born. Just go to a Zimbabwean funeral. Family and friends will immediately tell you where we go wrong. So in some ways, there has to be larger consensus building.
Doctor, if I can time with the point you made earlier about globalization. I've been interacting with a lot of young people, young professionals who are questioning the direction of their careers over the next 5, 10, 15, 20 years in Zim. And the thinking goes something like this. If I remain here, I can't see where I'll be in 5 years' time. I don't see that I will be able to move out of the house, look after my parents when the time comes for them to require assistance. Career progression, everything that I've learned and experienced, where will I be able to apply it in this futuristic Zimbabwe that you are telling me that I should believe in? On the flip side, if I leave, and your typical Zimbabwean is only maybe 1 or 2 degrees of separation away from someone who has left and seems to have a better life, or is in a position to generate financial resources or other that are able to be plowed back into a Zimbabwean family. So I can't see significant upside over the next 5 to 10 years for me and my family. However, if I go to the diaspora, even if I'm working at McDonald's in Canada or whatever the case may be, I can see that I'll be earning X amount over Y period. I'll then be able to send Z amount home so I can achieve these objectives. And so the value proposition of taking a strong stance here outweighs or is not as strong as, look, the risk is I'm going to disenfranchise myself from my family, I will lose my friends and my social circle, I'll be a foreigner in a land that I know nothing about. But the one thing that I'm certain about, that I want, that I'll be able to do, is generate for Bangalkumba, and so that tends to be, I don't think it's always a question of there's no point in me voting or complacency or impatience. I think sometimes it's purely practical decisions. You know, you've got people highly educated from all over the world and locally wondering where they can best apply what they've learned, if they can apply it, and if not, where they can go and apply themselves to aid, if not the country, then at least the people in their immediate world that are important to them.
And I'm going to sort of add to that as well as, you know, just as we consider some of these thoughts, and bring out the issue of space. I engage with conversations, and everyone is talking about, you know what, we're not afraid. I don't think there's a fear thing, but there's an issue of we don't have space. Whether now, whether 10 years, 20, there's no space. I don't see any space being created for what my end goal, this end goal that we're so focused on. I don't see space being created for this end goal. If it's not, maybe the next generation above me, immediately above me, it's going to be a ton of people that have been waiting for this situation to become whatever it is. There's just no space. So again, practically thinking, maybe I'm better off elsewhere where, things are established and yes, it may not be the biggest thing, but I can navigate a little bit better there than here where we're all going to be clamoring at some point and I am more liable to be trampled on.
So to summarize those last questions, the first one was risk versus reward. How can we regain hope as the Zimbabwean youth? The second one was, the second and third were on, is it practical to look, to solutions within Zimbabwe? Shouldn't we look outside or go work outside and then bring back resources here in Zimbabwe? Is there space for us? Maybe not.
Talking about Marx, I think Tukuma spoke about the fact that there is a mistrust between people who come from different social backgrounds. I think there's now a mistrust between Zimbabweans in Zimbabwe and Zimbabweans in the diaspora. I think if someone's going to stay, if you're going to make the decision to stay in Zimbabwe, be the best version of yourself in Zimbabwe. If you make the decision to leave Zimbabwe for the betterment of your family or you think it will help people in Zimbabwe, go be the best version of yourself in Canada, even if you're in McDonald's. Be brilliant. So that even one day maybe McDonald's will be like, we want to open up at home. I think what we need to understand is Zimbabwe is not good. The world doesn't work where every Zimbabwean now can be in Zimbabwe. It just doesn't function like that. So I think we need to be, I don't think leaving Zimbabwe is the worst decision someone can make. I just think we need to understand that when someone leaves, and when someone like yourself, if you ever left, understand why you're leaving, and the people around you, and you should still maintain the synergies. Because if I tomorrow want to build a power plant, I'm not going to generate $1 billion in Zimbabwe. I'm going to get it offshore. I should be able to call you up on a desk in London and be like, Mark, circle. You know what I mean? So I think we need to get past this distrust where someone who leaves, or someone, you stay Wakapusa, you leave, you're a traitor. It doesn't have to be like that. So I don't know if I'm answering you, but it's just something that's starting to irritate me when people just keep, I let me go where I want to go. Please stay if I want to stay, but let's work at this together.
So I'm going to try to be brief. Just to answer your question about space. Space is phenomenally a fight, right? To have space. So look at a forest. The trees have to fight for their space. No one gives it to them. That's the natural environment. We're always at war for space. So in as much as you say you don't see the space, you have to fight and create that space. No one is going to create that space for you. Before Coco Chanel, women didn't wear pants. That wasn't the fashion. She fought for the space for women to be the way they were, for that to be fashionable, for women to vote, for freedom. We're always talking about conflict. So for you to get space, don't ever sit and think someone is going to hand you the space and say, here is the space, be brilliant. You have to fight for the space. Life is a fight all the time for space. When we write exams, we're fighting for the space to be the one who gets into university. When we're in university, we're fighting for the space to be the one who gets the job. When you're in the job, you're fighting for the space to be the one who's brilliant. So if you're not willing to roll up your sleeves and fight for your space, you're never going to have the space. You're going to be that tree in the jungle that stays down here and is kind of feeding off everything else. So if you want to be brilliant and you want the space, you've got to fight for it. The last thing I'd like to say is Shay's question about, where is our hope when we've seen that sometimes, every time we vote, things remain the same. I'd like to just remind you that in 2008, when people voted, things did change. They might not have changed the way we wanted them to change completely. But like we spoke about, life is a story of failure, right? By the time we get to the electric, to the bulb, it's a story of failure. It's almost the story of a person who refused to stop doing things that were not working, right? They kept trying and trying and trying, and that really is the story of human progression. So in 2008, we got somewhere. It wasn't where we wanted to go, but we got there because people voted in unprecedented numbers. That is that story. People went out and said, no matter what, I'm going to vote. We have to remind ourselves the period from 2008 to 2013 was nice. We were improving. And that came because we fought for the space. I won't talk about what went wrong, but people fought for it. If we don't apply at least the principle that we saw that worked, that we fought for the space, we mobilized ourselves and we voted, then obviously there is no hope. So remind yourself that life is a story of failure, but without attempting, we will never, ever win at anything.
At this point, before anyone else interjects, we'd just like to thank the speakers who came through, sometimes offering complementary thoughts, sometimes offering differing views, but views that we can all take with us and then make a decision. And it's also important to thank ourselves, each and every one of us, because we came here, we weren't complacent, and we took part in the discussion. So I guess to summarize, as was mentioned by all the speakers, be smart, be bold, be brave, engage, strategize, do something. At whatever level, a personal level, family level, community level, do something. So thank you all for coming. Thank you, speakers.